Hello everyone, back again here with another Star Wars Destiny video. We're just continuing through the rest of the Awakening set. We are on It Binds All Things, the neutral blue support, cost 1 resource. And before you play a blue upgrade, you may exhaust this support to decrease its cost by 1. So you pay 1 resource, next part of your turn, you exhaust it, and whatever upgrade you're trying to play, as long as it's a blue upgrade, gets decreased by 1. So pay 1, decrease something by 1. You can play something like a Force Choke for 1 resource, immobilize for 1 resource, and so on. Another really cool thing about this is you can combine this with Imperial Armory or the Death Star Armory, where it is play an upgrade from your hand or a card from your hand, decreasing its cost by 1. So before you claim the battlefield, and you exhaust It Binds All Things, it would actually reduce it by 2. So you can, let's say you had a Mind Probe in your hand. Claim the battlefield, reducing the cost of the Mind Probe or whatever card you're playing by 1. You exhaust It Binds All Things, decreasing it by 2. You can then pay 2 resources to play Mind Probe, or if you have a 2 resource cost card already, can replace it with that essentially for free. So It Binds All Things is a very good blue card. I pretty much use it in all of my blue decks. I have it in my Rey and Qui-Gon deck, and I'm also running a copy, just a single copy, in my Dooku and Kylo Ren deck. It works well throughout the game, so beginning of each turn, you're getting 2 resources. So let's say on the second round, you can exhaust this and play a Kylo Ren lightsaber or a regular lightsaber for just 2 resources. Really good card. I have it in a few of my decks. I think it's a kind of like a staple at this point in blue, especially if you're going to be playing a lot of upgrades and a lot of kind of expensive upgrades. It's nice to be able to get those costs reduced. We're going to move into our next card. Next up, we have Aim. This is exclusive to the starter set. It's neutral and it's gray, so you can use it in any decks. 1 resource, turn of one of your dice to a side showing range damage. That could be regular range damage, it could be modified range damage. Um, I'm not a big fan of aim. I find focus is better to use because you can focus it to any side. And even if you played aim for 1 resource, you can put a die on a range damage side. Your opponent, unless you're doing something with ant, like unless you have a way to get additional actions out of this, you might not even be able to get to resolve that die. So, not a big fan of aim because I could basically aim. Let's say I have a +1 range damage, a +2 range damage, and the blank. I can set the blank to range damage, but then my opponent gets the opportunity to react to it, so they could just simply play something like deflect and deflect the normal range damage that you just spend a resource on and played a card to change to get rid of that die entirely. So it's kind of like a wasted card. That's aim. I'm not a big fan of it. I think there's other ways, other better ways to get dice to be on whatever side you want besides this. So we're going to move into our next card. Next up, we have All In. It's a neutral gray event, 1 resource. Resolve any number of your dice in the order of your choice. So if you have a couple focus results, maybe a couple blanks, some damage, you can play this. Use your focuses to focus into better results on your other dice, and then resolve all that damage. So let's say you have 2 focus die and like 4 um, 4 other dice. Let's say you have a +2 range damage, a +1 range damage, and 2 blanks. You can use your 2 focus to focus the blanks into range damage and then resolve all of it. It works really well, like I said, with focus, especially um, if your opponent's already claimed the battlefield, for example. You can just um, discard some stuff to reroll, get good results, and then just go all in and resolve them all in one shot. Just do a bunch of damage. You can get a bunch of shields out of it, or whatever you want. But 1 resource to do that, I think it's a really good card for that, especially if you're just trying to get a bunch of damage done really quickly. Let's say the character only has a few health left. You can go all in. Let's say you have a 2 melee damage and a range damage. If you go all in, it's 3 damage right there. So that's all in. We're going to move into our next card. We are now on block, neutral gray event again, 2 resources. Remove all of an opponent's dice showing melee damage. These are very situational. I'm not a huge fan of this one. I do have, I think, in my Kylo and Dooku deck, I think I have 1 or 2 of these. But it also depends on what kind of decks you're going to be playing against. If you have this in your deck and you're playing against Django and Veers, you're really not going to get much use out of it as far as the melee damage, but you might be able to discard it for a reroll, something like that. But it does cost 2 resources, so I think that's a little bit high. But also, if they are playing, let's say, playing Luke and Rey, and there's just a ton of melee damage, you can basically remove all of their dice. If they have 2 Rey dice, 2 Luke dice, they're all showing melee damage. Let's say they don't have any upgrades on them yet, and you can play this and just get rid of all their dice. So that is a good side to it. I think the two cost is a little bit high, especially for an event that you might not even need to play. Or, like I said, if you're playing against a ranged damage deck, this is mostly just going to be used to get rerolls. But that's block. We're going to move into our next card. We are now on Close Quarters Assault, neutral gray event again. 0 resources, so it's free. Count the number of dice you have showing melee damage and discard that many random cards from an opponent's hand. I've actually never used this in a deck, but I actually played against somebody that was using this very effectively. They were playing in a Luke and Rey deck, and I was playing my Kylo and Dooku deck. And I think that at one point they had 4 dice showing melee damage. So they played Close Quarters Assault. It milled me for 4, so it actually milled out my entire hand because I had played a card earlier in the round. And in doing that in a deck against like Kylo and Dooku is pretty devastating. So this is actually a really good card in that situation because it basically made it so I couldn't discard to do rerolls. It also made it so I couldn't discard to use Dooku's ability to get shields. And then it costs 0, so it's really good, especially if you're playing against a deck that's pretty much exclusively melee, like Rey and Luke is. I suppose I could also use this in my Kylo and Dooku deck. I might look at putting, 1 or 2 in there, replacing something else that I'm maybe not using as much. But this can mill out a lot of cards if it's used correctly. So, like I said, I had to discard 4 cards to it. And that took away, like I said, my reroll ability and Dooku's ability. So that was pretty brutal. That's Close Quarters Assault. We're going to move into our next card. And the final card we're looking at today is Dodge. Neutral gray event again. 2 resources. Remove all of an opponent's dice showing melee damage. It's essentially the same thing as block, just with range damage. I've used this a couple times to remove a bunch of dice that were showing range damage. Again, 2 resources, so it might be a little bit high, especially if you're playing against a deck that's not using any range damage, like you're playing against Rey and Qui-Gon, or Luke and Rey, or Django, or not Django, but Dooku and Kylo. It might not really be valuable to have in your deck. This would be something I would maybe like sideboard in, or if you know you're going to be playing against somebody if you know you're coming against Django and Veers, maybe play it then. But you can also discard it to reroll. It's really situational, just like block. So it either can remove a ton of dice or it's kind of a useless card. But sometimes it's good to have 1 or 2 of these in a deck, especially if they just roll out a bunch of melee or range damage. You at least can respond to it with something like this. But I'm not a big fan of using that. I would rather use something like Feel Your Anger and remove dice based off of blanks, things like that. He doesn't like you. I think the 2 is a little bit kind of expensive for this, and you can really end up wasting this card. There's only a couple dice showing range damage. Pay 2 resources, you discard this card and get rid of 2 dice. When maybe later in the match, they have like 5 dice showing range damage. It would be better to kind of save it for when there's more damage on the table, obviously. But that is Dodge, and that's going to do it for today's video. I want you to remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe. We'll be back again, I believe, in a day or 2 with another Star Wars Destiny video. We're going to continue going through the Awakening set. We're almost done with the events, and then we're going to be going into the locations as well. So be on the lookout for that. I again want to thank you for watching and take care.